Hey you guys, we are going to try something a little bit different today. I want to give you guys the opportunity to learn at your own pace and also to be accountable for your learning. So as you go through this video, you are going to encounter a series of questions where you have to stop and answer or stop and give a response before you can move on. So you won't be able to just sit and listen to the whole thing and then just click exit when it's done. You'll have to answer some questions throughout the presentation, and in addition you're going to need to take some notes, and that will be how you get points for today. So in order to get points, and I haven't decided how many it's going to be yet, but it will be a significant amount, you need to take your math notebook out and get something to write with so that you are ready to learn. Okay, so please get ready to take some notes. So we're going to be working on 3.05 today, which is slope, and a very significant portion of that is being able to convert from standard form into slope-intercept form. And that might be a little bit confusing for you, and it might sound like a lot. So we're going to break it down and just go slowly. I want you to really understand what standard form even is. And then I want you to really be able to understand what slope-intercept form is before we start working with some of the problems. So get your math notebooks out, okay? What is standard form? What is standard form? Standard form is, the mathematical definition is ax plus by equals c, right here. Ax plus by equals c. Now there's a lot of variables in there, and that might be a little confusing for you. So here's my explanation. So this is what you'll want to write down in your notes. You want to write down in your notes the x and y values are on the left-hand side of the equation. All the other values are on the right-hand side. That's standard form. So if you see here, let me write in purple, we have ax and by. Okay, so my x values and my y values are together on the left-hand side of the equation, and then you have whatever else on the right-hand side of the equation. That's all standard form is. Okay, x and y is on the left-hand side, everything else on the right-hand side. So get that in your notes. That is what standard form is. So I want to give you a little quiz. Which of the following equations is in standard form? Which of these follows the definition you just wrote down? So the correct answer is B. The reason why B is the correct answer is because we have the x values and the y values on the left-hand side of the equation, and everything else is on the right-hand side. So see, we have y minus 2x equals -6. We have our y and our x values on the left-hand side of the equation right there, and everything else is on the right-hand side of the equation. A does not count because the x and the y are not on the right side. They are not in the correct location. They're not together. And C doesn't work because, once again, the y is on the left-hand side, the x is on the right-hand side, and that doesn't meet our standards for standard form. Okay? That's it. Standard form just needs to have the x's and the y's on the same side. Everything else is on the other side. So now we're going to talk about slope-intercept form. So this is something you're going to want to write down in your notes. What is slope-intercept form? Well, the mathematical definition is y equals mx plus b. And again, that is given to you in all variables so that it can represent all equations in slope-intercept form. But I'm going to break it down for you a little bit, okay? So m represents the slope. M represents the slope. So the number that's being multiplied by x represents our slope. And B, that represents the y-intercept. So the reason why it's called slope-intercept form is because simply by looking at the equation, you're going to be able to identify the slope and the y-intercept. And then you also have a y and an x in there. And y and x just represent all of the x and y values that exist on the line. Because remember, there's an infinite number of points on the line, and they all have an x and a y value. So the x and the y value just stay there. They don't represent anything other than any x and y value imaginable. The ones I want you to focus on are the m and the b, okay? M represents the slope, b represents the y-intercept. So it's slope-intercept form. Okay, the way you can identify this equation is the y is alone on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is simplified. That's how you identify this one. Remember, standard form, the x and the y were on the same side, but slope-intercept form, you have the y alone, and everything else is on the other side. So that's how you can remember slope-intercept form. Y is on the left-hand side by itself, and everything else is on the other side. So here's a quiz question for you. Which of the following equations is in slope-intercept form? Okay, the correct answer is A. A is in slope-intercept form. Why? Because the equation is solved for y on the left, and all other information is on the right-hand side and is simplified. Okay, so I need to check your understanding right now. I want you to remember that slope-intercept form is in the form y equals mx plus b. Okay, m represents the slope, b represents the y-intercept. And I can go ahead and underline that for you. I'll underline m. M represents the slope, and b represents the y-intercept. So, in the equation, y equals 2x plus 12, what is the slope? And what is the y-intercept? All right, the answer is the slope is 2, and the y-intercept is 12. Why? Because the slope is in the same position that m is in, and the 12 is the integer being added. So slope is 2, y-intercept is 12. All right, here's your next one. In the equation y equals 1/4 x minus 3, what is the slope? And what is the y-intercept? All right, the answer to this question, the slope is 1/4, and the y-intercept is -3. All right, your third question is, in the equation y equals 18 minus 3/4 x, what is the slope and what is the y-intercept? All right, the answer to number 3, I'm guessing half of you may have gotten wrong, okay? That's just my teacher intuition going off. So, here's what I expect some of you answered. Here's what I expect. I expect that some of you said that the slope was 18 and that the y-intercept was -3/4, or 3/4 if you ignore the negative, which you shouldn't do. Okay, the reason why some of you probably did this is because you probably weren't paying attention to whether the first number was being multiplied by the x or not. You probably just looked at the first number and you said, oh, the first number is 18, so that's our slope. The second number is -3/4, so that's our y-intercept. That's not the case. We have to be particular. Y equals mx plus b is a form for the slope-intercept equation. And it's very important that we recognize that m is being multiplied by x. So our slope, since m represents the slope, our slope is the number that's being multiplied by x when the equation is in this form. So The equation is in this form because we have y on its own and everything else is on the other side. So this is slope-intercept form. The only difference is the commutative property of addition and subtraction is being used, and the numbers are being switched. So instead of having a negative 3/4 x plus 18, they've reversed it. But the value is the same. Nothing's been changed. Nothing's been changed. They just put the x second instead of first. So don't let this trick you. You need to pay attention and identify which number is being multiplied by the x. And in this situation, the number being multiplied by x is negative 3/4. So that's why your slope is negative 3/4. And the number that's just being added or subtracted to it is a positive 18. Notice there's nothing on the left-hand side of the 18, so it's just a positive 18. So the y-intercept is 18. Now you are going to see this a lot, so don't let the order trick you. If the x comes first or the x comes second, it doesn't matter as long as the y is isolated and it is in slope-intercept form. Okay, here's your last one. In the equation y equals x, what is the slope and what is the y-intercept? Take a minute. Think about this. Use your critical thinking skills, and I bet you'll get it right. Okay, so this is in the form y equals mx plus b, but we're missing some things. So it is slope-intercept form because we have a y on the left-hand side and everything else is on the right-hand side. So this is in slope-intercept form. So I'm assuming that many of you put that the slope was 0 and that the y-intercept was 0, or that they didn't exist. You may have gotten some of those answers or some different ones, but let's just talk about what the correct answer is. So in the equation y equals x, our slope is 1. And the reason is x is being multiplied by a 1 that we don't need to write out. Remember, if we write out x plus 4, that's really the same thing as saying 1x plus 4. Whenever there's a 1 there, we don't really write it. Because it's redundant, it's unnecessary, we don't need it there. So there's an imaginary little 1 right in front of here. So our slope is 1. Every time our x value changes by a number, our y value changes by that same number. It just goes up by 1 every time, okay? Now you'll notice that there is no b in the equation at all. In the equation y equals x, it's plus nothing. There's nothing else there. So the y-intercept is a 0. Okay, the y-intercept is just plain old 0, and it would also be redundant to write plus 0 or minus 0. So we don't write it. So y equals x is the same thing as saying y equals 1x plus 0, but we don't need to write the 1 and we don't need to write the 0 because that would just be, like I said, redundant. So that we just write it as y equals x. So if you see an equation that looks like that in the future, don't let it trick you. It's nothing crazy or new. It's just missing a few things. And you just have to remember that the x it exists. There's a 1 in front of it, and there's no y-intercept. So I'd like you to tell me at this point, how do you feel? Right now, all we've talked about is standard form, slope-intercept form, and how to identify the slope and the y-intercept from a slope-intercept form equation. So please, on a scale from 1 to 5, tell me how you are feeling. 1 is I'm totally lost. 2, I'm a little lost. 3, I'm beginning to understand this, but this is a lot to take in. 4, I get most of this, but I have a few questions. Or 5, I get this, it all makes sense. Please write any questions down that you have in the response boxes so that I know what you might be feeling right now and what questions you might have. Okay, so now we're going to get to the nitty-gritty, the meat of our lesson, how to convert from standard form to slope-intercept form. Now, I'd like to point out, if you are a new student and this begins to sound like French to you, like it's so confusing, you need to go back to Unit 2. You're not required to do any of the work in Unit 2, but if you have not learned the algebra that you need to know, you're going to need to go back to Unit 2 and review the lessons so that you can learn some of the algebra. And you can also send me an email and I will give you a really awesome review sheet that has some really good instructional videos on it. So just as a disclaimer for my new friends, I don't want you to feel like you're lost and that you have no hope. There is hope. You just need to go back and learn a few things. So here's the key concept. Our goal is to our goal is to convert from standard form into slope-intercept form. So we're going to take an equation that looks like ax plus by equals c, and we're going to turn it into an equation that looks like y equals mx plus b. Now with all of these variables, that sounds and looks like a lot, but really it's simple, and we've been doing this the whole year, okay? Ever since Unit 2, we have been manipulating equations. So how are we going to do this? We are going to manipulate the equation using reverse order of operations. This sounds like something hard, but we've already done it, okay? We've already done this in Unit 2. And some of you might be asking right now, why the heck do we even care about converting standard form into slope-intercept form? And the reason is because when you have an equation in slope-intercept form, the y equals mx plus b form, it becomes so easy to identify the slope and the y-intercept just by looking at it. And you've already done that in our practice problems when I gave you a slope-intercept form equation and asked you to identify the slope and the y-intercept. You've already done this, so you can see how easy it is to tell what the slope and the y-intercept is just from looking at the equation. That way you don't have to graph it, you don't have to create a table. You could if you wanted to, but it just becomes a lot more easy. So this is what we want to do. We want to be able to convert from one form into the other. And also you're going to see this on your quiz. So please remember that slope-intercept form, you should have this in your notes, is y equals mx plus b. Remember that m represents the slope and b represents the y-intercept. Very important that you know those things. So example 1. I am going to show you how to convert the equation negative 3x plus 5y equals 30 into slope-intercept form. So for this, I'd like you to take detailed notes, okay? I'm going to give you some steps, and I want you to take detailed notes so that when you have a practice problem, you can easily do it on your own. So the first step in turning something into slope-intercept form, remember our goal is to isolate the y variable. We want the y to end up alone. So our first step is going to be to move the x value to the other side. I just want to get that x value away. So I've typed it up here for you if it's going to be more easy for you to, if it's going to be easier for you to look at it in the typed version. But then on the other side of the screen, I'm going to show you how to do this by hand. So we have the equation negative 3x plus 5y equals 30. I want that y to be isolated. I want it to be all by itself, so I'm going to move that x onto the other side. And this is something that we did in Unit 2. Remember, when I have a negative 3x and I want to take that whole thing, I want to take the whole negative 3x and I want to move it onto the other side of my equation, I need to do the opposite. That's why it's called the opposite order of operations. So we will add 3x to both sides. Negative 3x plus 3x is nothing. So we're left with 5y equals, now we cannot add these two. 30 and 3x are not like terms. They're an apple and an orange. One is a number being multiplied by a variable. We can't add them together. So we have to just leave it like 30 plus 3x. So that's step one. We've moved our x's onto the other side of the equation. All right, step two, we are now going to divide both sides by the y's coefficient. That's math lingo. It's going to be easier to understand the more you hear it. So I'm just going to show you the process again. So we had minus 3x, negative 3x, plus 5y equals 30. We added the 3x to both sides so we could get the 5y by itself. I'm just rewriting this because it didn't copy from my other slide. So here we are. We started with the equation that looked like this. Then we added a 3x to both sides. So the next step is to divide both sides by the coefficient of y. Well, the coefficient of y is this 5. I want to divide everything on the left-hand side by 5, everything on the right-hand side by 5. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to divide 5y by 5, and I'm going to divide 30 by 5, and I'm going to divide 3x by 5. Everything gets divided by 5, okay? That's the rule. When you divide something by 5, you have to do it to everything. So 5y divided by 5 leaves you with y. 30 divided by 5 leaves you with 6. 3x divided by 5 just leaves you with 3/5 x. And that is your final answer. So y equals 6 plus 3/5 x. That's our final answer. We know that this is in slope-intercept form because the y is isolated and everything else on the right-hand side is simplified. Okay? That's how we do it. If you want, I will show you one more time. We had a minus 3x plus 5y equals 30. We want to move the x's to the other side. So we will add 3x to both sides. That leaves us with 5y equals 30 plus 3x. And we now want to isolate the y. And some people get confused at this step. Some people want to subtract the 5. But you need to realize that 5 and y are being multiplied together. We need to do the opposite order of operations. They're being multiplied, they're being stuck together using multiplication, and we need to pull them apart. So the way that we undo multiplication is through division. So that is why we divide everything by 5. And that leaves us with our final answer, y equals 6 plus 3/5 x. Okay, so why did we do this? Why did we convert from standard form into slope-intercept form? The reason is so that we could better understand the solution. We wanted to identify our slope and our y-intercept. And now that it's in slope-intercept form, we can do that. So please tell me which number is in the m position in our answer, or what is the slope of our line? Now tell me which number is in the b position in our answer, or what is the y-intercept of the line? Okay, I hope that you didn't get tricked by these questions. When I asked you what the slope of the line was, I hope you remembered that the slope of the line is the number that's being multiplied by x. I hope you remembered that it wasn't just the first number, but it was the number being multiplied by x. If you got tricked, it happens. Let's try not to do it again. Okay, 3/5 is the number being multiplied by x, so 3/5 is the slope. If you got that first question right, then you obviously would have gotten the second question right. The b, or the y-intercept, is the integer that's being added or subtracted to the variable expression. Here's the variable expression. Here is the y-intercept. So in our situation, the equation that we got, here is our variable expression, 3/5 times x, and here is the number being added to it. It's a positive 6. So the y-intercept is positive 6. Okay, now it is your turn to try this on your own. And so you need to write this equation in slope-intercept form. Please take as long as you need to try and figure this out. The goal is to help you to get some practice time. And if you get this question right, this is a quiz question, it tells me and you that you understand this and that you're ready to move on. And if you have a hard time with it, that tells us that you have something else to learn, and you might want to ask some questions when in a couple of slides when you have a chance to ask some questions. Okay, I hope you've had an opportunity to work on this question and solve it. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate for you how we solve this equation. So we have 4x minus 2y equals 10. And I'm mistaken when I say solve this equation. We're not solving anything. We are just rearranging, okay? We want to isolate our y variable. That's our goal. So our goal is to isolate the y. So we want to move positive 4x away from the y. The 4 and the x are stuck together. We're moving them together. So we're going to do the opposite. So instead of a positive 4x, we're going to subtract 4x from both sides. So 4x minus 4x is 0. That leaves us with a negative 2y equals 10 minus 4x. The reason we write it like this is because 10 and negative 4x are not like terms. We cannot subtract 4x's from 10. They're apples and oranges. So don't try and do that. You just leave them how they are if they're not like terms. Alright, so now we're left with a negative 2y minus 10, negative 2y equals 10 minus 4x. And a lot of you may want to try and add the 2 to both sides. And that's not correct. And here's why. 2 and y are being stuck together using multiplication. Notice there's no symbol in between the negative 2 and the y. So that's a negative 2 times y. That's how they're being stuck together right now. So addition is not going to separate them like we want it to. So we need to separate negative 2 and y by division. So we're going to take negative 2y, we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. Remember, we have to divide everything by negative 2. So negative 2y divided by negative 2 just leaves you with a y. 10 divided by negative 2 gives you negative 5. And negative 4x divided by negative 2, remember that's a negative divided by a negative, that's going to leave you with a positive 2x. So your final answer should be y equals negative 5 plus 2x. Okay, so our final answer was y equals negative 5 plus 2x, or you could have also written it as y equals 2x minus 5. That's the same thing, the order's just switched. So now that you have that answer, what is the slope of the line? Remember, this is written in slope-intercept form, so you should be able to identify the slope just by looking at the equation. Okay, this is your second practice problem. Please convert this equation into slope-intercept form. Okay, I hope that you've had some time to do this and that you've done it detailed in your notes so that you can identify where you went right or where you may have gone wrong. So I'm going to demonstrate for you how we solve this problem. We have 3x plus 4y equals 12. Remember, our goal is to isolate the y variable. So we need to move all of our x's away. So we have 3 x's on the left-hand side, and we want to move those 3 x's to the right-hand side, or we're going to subtract them. That's how we're going to get rid of the 3 x's on this left-hand side. We're going to subtract them. And in order to keep our equation balanced, we need to subtract 3x's from the right-hand side as well. So 3x minus 3x, that leaves us with no x's, and a 4y equals 12 minus 3x. Remember, 12 and negative 3x are not like terms. We cannot combine them, so you just leave them as they are. Our last step is to separate the 4 and the y. 4 and y are being multiplied together. Remember, there's no symbol in between them. They're just being multiplied together. So in order to pull them apart, we have to use division. So we'll divide everything on both sides by 4. 4y divided by 4 gives you y. 12 divided by 4 gives you 3. And negative 3x divided by 4, we'll just leave it in fraction form, gives you negative 3/4 x. And that is your final answer. Okay, so the answer, when you write 3x plus 4y equals 12 in slope-intercept form, the answer is y equals negative 3/4 x plus 3. You could also write this as y equals 3 minus 3/4 x. Remember, the order doesn't matter. So now that you know this equation, what is the slope of the line? Okay, how did you do? Did you get both questions right? Both of them wrong? 1 and 1? If you are still having troubles and you feel like you are still not getting it, here is a great video you can watch. It's a Khan Academy video. So go ahead and click on that link. And if it doesn't work, text me, let me know, and I'll get it fixed. But that should take you to the Khan Academy video if you need more work, more help understanding. What questions do you have for me? Remember, I tell you guys, I'm not a Gypsy mind reader. I don't know when you're getting it, when you're not getting it, or how you're feeling. And if you have any questions, now is an amazing time to ask. We're not in a live class session. You're not interrupting class by asking me a question. You're not postponing or stopping anything, and no one can see your questions. So you have as much time as you want. Please type any questions in that you have. What concepts are you getting confused about? Is there a certain step that you got stuck on, or a place that you got lost? Do you have any questions that you'd like us to go over before we move on in our next class? I don't want you to be lost before we move on to 3.06, so please stop me and let me know. Now is the time to let me know if you have any questions. Okay, your homework for today is to complete the 3.05 assessment, which is a quiz. It's on your plan for today, so you should see it. If you don't pass, please email me any questions you have that you got wrong so that I can get them answered for you and I can help you figure out where you may have gone wrong, okay? So that's your homework for today. Please get that done before you log out of school today. This is your exit ticket. So if you made it to the end of the video, I will know that, and that will be your exit ticket, and that will give you attendance points for today. If you happen to be watching this on a different day, you didn't come to class, please make sure you send me an email and let me know that you watched this. Thanks so much, you guys. Have an awesome day. See you tomorrow.